I'm even 11 years out and there's still grief there. It's not that you move from one to the other, it's that you're holding both simultaneously. Even in the midst of the grief and the sorrow, there was still this hope and light of God
Mm.
pulling us and convicting us of what we were going to do in her memory. But even more so, it was this surrender of saying, I do want to follow you. I want to be all in and I want to do what you ask me to do.
Welcome to Living the Grace Life. I'm your host, Jennifer Sakata, and you've made your way to the corner of real grace for your real life. Sometimes grace is hard to come by, like when your heart is deeply wounded by grief and loss. 12 years ago, I joined the sisterhood to which no one requests entry. In 2013, we lost our son Agape in miscarriage. And for nearly 10 of those 12 years, I buried the fear that I had caused the death of our son when I slipped down our basement stairs. Why was I in such a hurry? What if I hadn't worn those white socks that didn't have the grips on them? These things we turn over and over in our minds, afraid we had done the one thing we could never imagine. My guest today has helped thousands of women sift through lies from the enemy in order to discover the welcome of God's unrelenting grace. I met Ashley Opliger at the Daughter's First retreat last March, and as I sat down, I discovered quickly that Ashley is that kind of friend who's skilled at sitting with someone in their sadness because she's been there and because she chooses to live as a woman of hope. On paper, Ashley is the USA Today best-selling author of her debut book, Cradled in Hope. Ashley is also the founder and executive director of Bridget's Cradles, a national nonprofit providing hope and healing to more than 30,000 bereaved families. They're in over 1,600 hospitals across all 50 states. She's also host to the award-winning Cradled in Hope podcast. She's a sought-after speaker and writer, but in my experience with Ashley, she shines best in her connection to other people. She leads in-person and online support groups and organizes an annual event called Wave of Light, which is a remembrance event held on Pregnancy and Infant Loss Remembrance Day, which, friends, is tomorrow, October 15th. Ashley lives in Wichita, Kansas with her husband and their 2 sons, where she loves inside jokes and pranks. I'm going to have to ask about that one. Please help me welcome my friend, Ashley Opliger. Ashley, welcome to Living the Grace Life.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer, and such an honor for you to speak of me that way. As you shared, I was just so honored to meet you in Colorado Springs and get to know you and your heart and really develop a friendship. I'm thankful to be on your podcast and get to have this conversation with you today.
Things happen when you gather in a castle in Colorado, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so first things first. Are you the one who's pulling the pranks, or are they getting pulled on you and you have a great sense of humor, or maybe both?
Usually pulling the pranks, but it's only with my
I love it.
closest people, my family members and my closest friends.
I love it. Okay, so what's your best one that just makes you laugh even if they didn't?
We do a lot up at our headquarters with some of the women that serve with me. We have an attic that we put all of our Wave of Light stuff up there. You have to duck down, and it's not somewhere where anyone would want to be up there. We were up there, and it was dark, and I turned the light on, and I basically pretended that there was someone living up there. Wait, what are you doing up here? My friends were very startled and concerned.
Of
I've
course.
done several things like that over time, but usually they'll try to get me back. Just small things, but we get a kick out of it. We obviously are in a very spiritually and emotionally heavy ministry. And so even in the midst of that, we try to have some lighthearted moments and just enjoy serving together and being friends.
Oh, I love that. I say a lot, especially when things are feeling especially hard, that grace grows in the giggles. So wherever we can add a little bit of levity, that's always going to be a good thing. And grace immediately gets welcomed to the table. Our younger son, he still hasn't decided what he wants to be when he grows up. But if there was a profession called prankster, he might actually be really good at it.
Yeah. Oh,
Gives
I
us a
mean,
lot of
there's
laughter.
a lot of people in practical jokers. And then I used to watch Candid Camera when I was little, and that was my
Oh, I
kind
love
of sense
that.
of humor.
Mine too. That's a good one. Ashley, tell us about your people.
Yeah. Regarding people who have made an impact in my life, my family, my parents, my husband, and then my friends. Most of them are women who have lost a baby themselves and are serving in memory of their child. Others are just people who really have a compassionate heart and a lot of empathy for our mission and the grieving moms we serve. A lot of my friendships, I would say, are really what keep me
Mm.
sustained in this ministry. And I also have a very loving, supportive husband. We've been through a lot in our marriage. Losing Bridget in our first year of marriage was very difficult, but thankfully we've both just wanted to lean on each other and lean on God through it. And it doesn't mean that it hasn't been hard, but we've come out the other side stronger in our faith.
Now, you and your husband, Matt, you had a unique theme for your wedding. Tell us about that and why did you choose it?
So our wedding theme was called Grace and Redemption. And it was at Grace Hill Winery, which is a winery here in Kansas. We were married outside under an arbor that my dad and Matt built together. We chose Grace and Redemption because we had both come out of relationships. He had been previously engaged, and I had previously been married and gone through adultery and abandonment. When the Lord brought us together, we just really found it as the Lord's redemption and grace for us, that for both of us, and I'll speak more so for myself, thinking no one's ever going to want to be with me now that I've been married before. And so just for the Lord to bless me with such a good, faithful, God honoring man was grace and redemption.
I love that. What a beautiful place to start the covenant of marriage in redemption and grace.
Thank you. It felt very much like a celebration of our marriage, but also of what God had done in our lives.
Yeah, I love that. You've mentioned Bridget already. Why don't you introduce us to Bridget and how she brings us to your book, Cradled in Hope?
Yeah. So the Grace and Redemption wedding was on May 3rd of 2014. And then we didn't leave right away for our honeymoon. So it was like a week later. And we ended up conceiving on our honeymoon. So Bridget was a honeymoon baby. We were very excited to grow our family and felt like it was such a sweet gift to go down to St. Lucia, this little slice of heaven on earth, and to come home with a baby. And so we were very excited and started thinking about the nursery and buying the clothes and everything. And it was about 13 weeks into our pregnancy. I was at work. I was a speech pathologist, and I started having very heavy bleeding. I went to the emergency room and they diagnosed it as a subchorionic hemorrhage. They just told me to go on bed rest to try to keep it as easy and take it as easy as possible. So I was basically on bed rest for 11 weeks. That was really difficult and painful because we were praying and asking the Lord, okay, God, you've redeemed us and you brought us together. We felt like you were blessing us with growing our family. And now what is going on? How could this be part of your will that you would, quote unquote, take our baby from us? That's bad theology. That's why I'm using the word quote unquote, but that's how I felt at the time. I felt very forsaken and abandoned. Like, why, God? Why are you not answering our prayers? Why are you letting this happen after all we've been through and the pain of our past? But then on October 22nd, 2014, she was stillborn. I basically went into labor because of the hemorrhage turned into a placental abruption. And even though we knew that was a likely outcome, it was still incredibly shocking and traumatic, just filled with so much grief and heartache. And how could this be reality? How is it that we have given birth to our baby girl and she's in heaven? But at the same time, experiencing the Lord's peace and knowing that we got to hold her body, but we knew her soul was in heaven and that we were going to be able to see her again because of Jesus. And so this whole situation was so overwhelming for us, but at the same point, it felt like the Lord's closeness and his just comfort was very tangible and present in that moment in the hospital. And then in the days after and the weeks after, the Lord very soon after showed us that he had a plan for her life and that through her life, we would start a ministry to comfort other people with the same comfort God had given us. And that's how Bridget's Cradles was born.
Gosh, talk about grace and redemption. That's a quick turnaround, if you will, of God's plans and purposes being revealed. On paper, that might seem like an easy process. As you reflect back, I know your heart was wrecked with grief, and not just yours, but your husband's also. Talk with us about how losing Bridget not only impacted you and your relationship with God, but also impacted Matt and your relationship as a couple with hopes and dreams that have just been left behind.
I'm glad you said on paper it could look like we lost a baby and then we started a ministry and everything was good. And that's not the way that it went down. We were starting the ministry in the midst of the grief. I think that's the thing is I'm even 11 years out and there's still grief there. It's not that you move from one to the other. It's that you're holding both simultaneously, even in the midst of the grief and the sorrow and sitting in that and wrestling with God through those questions. There was still this hope and light of God pulling us and convicting us of what we were going to do in her memory, but even more so, it was this surrender of saying, I do want to follow you. I want to be all in and I want to do what you ask me to do. It's been an interesting journey in terms of the grief with Matt and I. It's very common for men and women to grieve differently and for that to cause tension in marriages. Matt and I have really, over time, learned each other better. Grief is an opportunity to know your spouse better because it's like grief can bring out the worst in you. It gives you an opportunity to be vulnerable with your spouse. Certainly, I have seen marriages where that can drive a wedge, but I've also seen so many beautiful stories, including my own, where grief is actually an invitation for intimacy and connection. That doesn't mean that it's easy because of communication and different ways of grieving, being able to communicate your needs and how you're feeling and what you need out of grief. I have been very expressive in my grief and crying and talking about it. And I also like to do things in her memory, plant a tree or release balloons on her birthday and have a cake. Although Matt will participate in all of those things, if it were up to him, that wouldn't be something he feels like he needs. For him, he wants solitude where he goes to her grave and he takes his hat off and he has a moment to himself, giving him time and space to grieve and process it in the ways that he needs, and then just supporting and loving each other in each other's ways instead of assuming that the other person isn't grieving just because they're not grieving the same way that you are.
That's a really important insight and definitely one that we had to wrestle with a lot. It's easy to make the assumption that your spouse isn't grieving if it doesn't look like what makes sense to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I share in my book about the love languages and how we give and receive love differently, and we also grieve differently. And so for one person where quality time might be their love language and they just want someone to sit with them in their grief and just be present. Someone else might want gifts where it's a thoughtful gift in memory of their baby would just be, wow, you really remembered me and remembered my baby. What's important is to know what those things are because maybe your spouse is trying to support you in grief and love you, but maybe they're not giving the love that you need in the ways that you need it. And so you're not receiving it as such. My friend Candy, she wrote a book with Gary Chapman. It's the 5 love languages for grieving parents. The book is called Holding On to Love After You've Lost a Baby. And so that one dives way deeper than I'm able to do in my book because that wasn't the focus of my book, but that is a really good resource. Matt and I have found a lot of usefulness with the love languages, but ultimately coming together and communicating where we're at and how we're feeling. I think where we get into trouble is when we bottle up the grief and we push it down and we stay distracted and busy and then assume the worst of each other instead of sharing where we're hurting and where we're feeling overwhelmed.
Now, you talk about how when we bottle up the real emotions and feelings, essentially they come out sideways. And we do that with the people we love, but I think there's also that space where we do that with ourselves to release ourselves from that reel that's running in our head that says, you did this. Why didn't you? Why couldn't you be a better mom? All those lies from the enemy that are only meant to steal and destroy. And I know that's something you've wrestled with. So take us there. What did it look like for you to show grace to yourself when you felt like, as you put it, your body betrayed you?
Yeah. I wrote an entire chapter on this called Grace Upon Grace when you can't forgive yourself because it was part of my journey. I really felt like my body betrayed my daughter. Even though I couldn't control that, there was part of me thought maybe if I would have done something differently or if I would have had the knowledge that I have now about my hormones, that I could have done something differently. We have this false sense of being our own God or that we can control things. And that's something I've really had to surrender is saying, I cannot control everything. And there are things outside of my control, including things in my body. I couldn't know things then that I know now because the only reason
Yeah.
I know them now is because I went through what I went through then. Even though we know we can't go in the past and change the past, sometimes we hold ourselves accountable as if we should have known or could have gone back
Mm,
and done something different. As a mom, we feel as though we should protect our babies, and God has wired that in us to protect and to nurture. The enemy uses that. You didn't protect your baby. The most important thing to remember is if you could have saved your baby, you would have. Even our children that survive pregnancy and birth, there's still brokenness outside in the world, and we are not guaranteed any day for them or for us. I know that sounds a very pessimistic way of looking at life, but it's the reality of living in a very broken world with broken bodies. Throughout that chapter, there's just a lot of talk of extending the same grace that we would give someone else if they were telling us their story.
What I appreciate about that too is that we are not omnipotent or omnipresent. We are the beloved of an omnipotent God. And part of grace is acknowledging who He is while also acknowledging who we are, which will always come with limitations. The hope that's paired with that is that God is constantly moving toward us.
Amen.
Yeah.
No.
You've also talked about showing grace to well meaning people who say things or do things that don't alleviate and bring comfort, but they actually make it harder. You've heard the sayings, God just needed another flower for his garden, or he needed another angel in his choir. People don't mean to be hurtful. What does grace look like coming alongside someone who's lost a child through miscarriage or stillbirth or early infancy?
Yeah. I think it's human nature when someone's grieving. People like to give a silver lining or a blessing in it because they either trying to fix it or trying to help you look on the bright side. And that's actually not what grieving people need. I have a list of common remarks that people say. A lot of them start with, at least you were able to get pregnant, at
Mhm.
least you have other children, at least you can get pregnant again. I share some ideas on how to lovingly educate and correct those, but in a way that's filled with truth, but also grace.
Mm.
I talk about the grace cup, which is essentially pouring a cup of grace that you're ready to pour out onto people because most likely these comments will come and blindside you. It can be all sorts of different comments. For me, a lot of times people will refer to me as a boy mom because I have two boys. And so whenever they say that, I think you're leaving out my daughter. They're not trying to be hurtful. They're not trying to purposely leave her out. And so I think the more I can just extend grace instead of I'm going to take offense to anything that people say, that's really not the way that I want to live. Not giving forgiveness or grace is really drinking your own poison. It's harming you more than it is the other
Mhm.
person. I want to extend that grace to people and see what are their intentions behind what they're saying. Their delivery and execution was not the greatest, but what were they trying to do with their words? I think most of the time, the things that come across as insensitive are well intended but poorly delivered.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough to say. So the grace cup is a symbol for having a ready response. It's coming with the assumption that they did not mean to give offense or to be hurtful.
Yes, because most of the time these things will come up when you're not expecting it. And so if you haven't already pre-filled it, your natural reaction is going to be to have that defensiveness. And so it's like symbolically pouring grace into that cup and walking around with it. And then as soon as something comes up, it's pour it out. You've already predetermined what your response is going to be.
So, Ashley, we need to extend grace to ourselves. We need to pour that grace cup out with generosity to those who are around us. But we also need practical, everyday ways we can express our grief as part of this process. What are some ways where listeners can mark grief or how they can tangibly move through this journey of grieving?
Yeah. Everybody grieves a little bit differently, but we have compiled an ebook about this on just some of the ways that I have found helpful in my journey.
Oh, great.
It's an ebook for free on our Bridget's Cradles website. And something that's important to say is whether it's the ebook or what I'm about to share, some ideas, we shouldn't look at grief as like a checklist of things that we need to
Yeah.
do. It's more of these are ideas and invitations for you if you feel these would be helpful healing ways. And so some of the ideas shared are crying. A lot of times we try to be so strong and we try to bottle up that emotion. And I know there's many times for me that I have to just give myself time and space to cry and let all of it flood out.
Yeah.
Tears are a physical release of sadness. God made our bodies in that way. Also, journaling. I found it's very helpful to write prayers to God, to just journal my honest thoughts. Right after Bridget was born, I had a little journal book that I was writing letters to her of things I would have said if she were here. That was very helpful in the beginning days for me. Worship music has been very healing and expressive. Even if you can't sing it right now, if you can just let the words wash over you and listen to the music. We actually have 4 worship playlists on our website that I've curated specifically for grief. We have one that's instrumental hymns. I have a soft worship playlist, which is just very calming, sit in the sadness, but also reverent worship. And then I have a dance it out and a let it out. And the dance it out is more like upbeat worship
Those
music.
sound really good.
Yeah. I think it's called rest in it, sit in it, dance it out, and let it out. And so essentially there's instrumental, soft worship, upbeat, and then like a rock one, rock music. And
That's
so
terrific.
those are all Spotify playlists that I put together on our website. We also have an ebook on how to honor your baby on specific holidays, due date, heaven day, ideas on how to honor them in your heart and your home, wearing memorial jewelry. There are lots of different ideas. And again,
That's so
if you're
great.
listening to this and you're like, whoa, that's a lot, don't feel like you need to go do all of these things. It's just giving you ideas of ways that might be meaningful to you.
One of the most precious gifts that I was given after we lost Agape was a friend who printed on some really nice paper a poem about my child who is now safe in the arms of Jesus. It's on our wall next to the pictures of our living here on earth with us sons. And it's something I can look at regularly and remember the hope and the reality that my child is safe in the arms of Jesus. What would you say, Ashley, what's at stake if we are not ready with our grace cup or if we're not willing to pour that cup out?
It really hurts us because if your cup is emotionally to the brim, one little thing can make all of the content spill over versus in normal life, you have a little margin. And so one little drop, one little thing that someone says is going to make a little ripple and then it's going to settle and it's going to be fine. When you're in active grief, there sometimes are magnified reactions because you're emotionally at that level. What's at risk is getting to a place where you live in victim mentality of this poor me, this is my life story. And I think it's a fine line because I would still say, I don't like that this is part of my story. I don't like that I lost my daughter to stillbirth, but I don't want to live in a state of victimhood. I want God to use these trials and sadness and grief and loss to sanctify me as a Christian. I want good to come from it. I want Him to use it for His glory. What's at stake is if we get stuck in our grief and we get stuck in a place where we aren't extending grace to others or ourselves, we might not be able to fully find that healing through Jesus and then the fruit from that harvest may not come out.
Yeah. Now you've been through just tremendous loss and pain. The loss of your daughter, Bridget, as we've talked about. You also mentioned the loss of your dad, which was more recent, only just last year by a drunk driver. You started at your wedding with grace and redemption. In a very short time, God gave you a new way to live into grace and redemption. Fast forward more years, and you're faced with the same choices once again as you're grieving your dad. In that time, you've developed some rhythms of grace that ground you in hope. Share with those who are listening right now, what are some of the practices and rhythms that you go back to regularly to keep yourself rooted in grace and in hope?
Certainly staying in the Word of God, because our flesh reaction is not grace and redemption.
Yeah.
It's anger and bitterness. Watch the model of Jesus. The chapter that we keep referring to is called They Know Not What They Do. That's from Jesus on the cross, forgiving the Roman soldiers, crucifying him and saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That has been definitely at play with the process of forgiving the man and woman that killed my dad. They know not what they did. They don't understand the magnitude of the value of his life. They don't understand grief that it's caused my mom and our family members. They'll never understand that. And so you say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I have a strong sense of wanting justice for what happened, but I know that ultimate justice can't happen because there's nothing that a broken justice system can do to bring him back or make this right. My ultimate hope is in Jesus, who is the ultimate judge and the one that can bring my dad back from the grave. And so my hope is in Jesus. I definitely want to be a strong advocate against drunk driving because I don't want another family to experience what my family has experienced. Sometimes consequences are the best. Consequences are actually helpful in bringing people to accountability and bringing them to life change. And that's my prayer for this person, that ultimately he would have remorse and life change through this. But ultimately, the justice that's here is not for me to bring about. Yes, I am advocating and doing what I feel is my part, but also knowing that this man's soul is in God's hands. And as my pastor has said, justice will happen either at judgment or at the cross. And there is no sin, nothing that someone can do, including killing someone while drunk, that Jesus can't forgive.
So on the days that you struggle to get there, to extend grace to this person responsible for your dad's death, what does that look like for you? Because they have irreparably changed your life. Sometimes it's easier to hold on to the impact of their decision than onto grace. Let's be honest. Grace is really hard to come by. So in those spaces when it's hard to come by for you, where do you go?
I started drumming.
Oh, okay.
So my dad was a very talented guitarist. Music was such a big part of his life and was a part of my childhood because of him. I grew up listening to him play guitar. After he went to heaven, I just felt this strong sense that I was going to become a drummer. And that's so strange because I'd never played drums in my life. So now I'm a 37-year-old mom buying an electric drum kit. I know that's an interesting thing to transition from the Word of God and prayer to drums, but let me explain. So there is an anger and sadness and sometimes a rage that needs to come out of me. Like when I'm missing my dad so much, there's so much anger, and drumming has been an avenue to get that out. And there's actually a lot of brain science about drumming in the left and right hemisphere and how because you basically have to have 4 limbs working independently of each other. I think something about getting my left and right side of the body to be working independently has been very good for my brain. And so drumming has been an unexpected outlet for processing my grief and all the feelings related to the trauma. I feel very connected to my dad when I play music. I feel very connected to God Sometimes I want to play classic rock stuff and other times worship music and whatever it is, I feel like I'm doing for the glory of God, expressing my feelings through drumming. But ultimately, I think when I'm really stuck with the grace, and this is a process, by the way, I am not going to sit
Yeah.
here and act like I've forgiven him and I'm just fine now and this is not affecting me. I have forgiven him, but I have to continually forgive him. And so then I go back to Jesus and I go back to the
Yeah.
cross and I say the prayer again. And so it's a continual surrender. For me, that's going to be something until I'm with my dad again. I will be grieving him. And that doesn't mean that God's not going to heal my heart and bring redemption out of this, but it takes time. Even with Bridget, my heart's not going to be fully healed until I'm with her again. That's part of being a Christian. We weren't made for this earth. The Bible says that we are citizens of heaven and we're longing for a better country, a heavenly one.
Mhm.
I do believe God can bring joy and redemption and he's going to use this for good, but I'm homesick and I
Yeah.
ultimately am not made for this broken world. And so for me is just understanding this is going to be a journey.
This is not a one and done. We can relate to that because there are spaces that have been left in all of us. And the grace of God is what comes and fills those spaces in us. But what I love about this process of drumming is the honesty and the vulnerability. Too often we try to either fix ourselves or fix some circumstance in ways that God is not asking of us. There is deep sorrow and deep pain there, but I'm the safe place for you to come to. And so you can do that while you're drumming. You can do that while you're praying. You can do that while you're in the word. God isn't threatened by that in us. I think his grace is what comes alongside us and says, it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm here with you.
And welcoming those emotions and not seeing them as bad or wrong, because righteous anger in our family circumstance is a right and godly response to what has happened. Someone who's listening who's been through something, righteous anger is a right response. When I think of the image of my dad suffering in the hospital because of what someone else did, that is righteous anger because that's
Yeah.
wrong. And I know that's wrong. And it pains me to think of it. And so it's welcoming that feeling instead of being like, I shouldn't be angry. I'm a Christian. No, that's actually Jesus flipping tables. And I think it's also what you do with it. If I go and take this righteous anger and I go do something sinful, that's not the right response. If I go drum on the drums or whatever it is that it's like how that comes out of me, I think there are very healthy outlets for righteous anger and not shaming yourself into having these human emotions that God put inside of us. So I think even when it comes to the loss of our babies, like we know that's not right and that's not the
Yeah.
way that God intended. I shouldn't have had to bury my daughter. Whoever's listening, you should not have had to go through this. And I think that was a shifting point for me to see I hate death. And so does God. The sting of death is awful, but that's the point. Jesus came as a sacrifice so he could overcome it. The sin and death, it's Jesus's enemy too. He weeps with us over it. He's right there with me in all the feelings about the loss of my dad, the loss of my daughter. He's with me and welcomes me to sit at
Yeah.
his table with those feelings because he felt them too.
Yeah. That's a really important place for us to land, Ashley, because I think sometimes we get it the other way around. We think God will only welcome and receive us when we get all the rest cleaned up. And if that were the case, then we wouldn't have needed Jesus. So thank you for your honesty and vulnerability in that. You've spent thousands of hours sitting in your blue barn talking with moms and families who have had to say goodbye too soon. What would you whisper to that mom or dad or Nana or Papa who's carrying the weight of grief?
Yeah, I would just start by saying, my heart grieves with you and remembers your baby with you. And although right now the darkness of grief feels like it's never going to end, that Jesus is in the tunnel with you, there's an expiration date on your suffering because no matter what happens in this world, we have a hope-filled future in heaven. He also promises abundant life here, that he's going to walk with us through our trials. The grief is an invitation to be with Jesus in a very intimate way that you may never experience outside of grief. You are seen and loved. So often we feel abandoned, like he's not there, he doesn't care, but he does see you. He's near to the brokenhearted. He walks with you and he weeps with you. He hates death so much that he overcame it. He took on this brutal, humiliating death so that we had a way back to his Father and that we have eternity in heaven. Keeping your eyes fixed on that future of heaven, knowing that this grief will one day, all of the tears will be wiped away, that he will make all things new, all things right. He will use all of this for his glory if you surrender your heart to him and allow him to work in your pain.
I noticed as you were talking, Ashley, about the hope of heaven, you and I both, we closed our eyes. And I just love the reality of the not yet that's coming, that even while we are experiencing the brokenness and the struggle in our right now,
How good it will be.
we
Yeah.
cannot even imagine what that's going to be like. Ashley, how can people be in touch with you? I want them to know how to get a hold of your book.
So the best way would be on our website, bridgetscradles.com. If you're wanting more information about our ministry, about our support groups, our podcast, my book, everything's on there. My book, Cradled Hope, is sold wherever books are sold. So you can also find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, wherever. We have ebooks for free for families for various purposes. We have how to plan a memorial service. We have grieving and healing ones. We also have one for how to honor your baby on your due date or heaven day or holidays. There's an entire ebook specifically for those who are looking to support someone. And podcast, we have so many episodes. I think we're over 60 episodes right now.
All right. I will make sure that the links are in the show notes so people can get in touch with you. I'm asking my guests about a song they go to when grace is hard to come by. So what would that be for you, Ashley?
Yeah. Amazing Grace. It has very strong symbolism in my life and very important milestones. At our wedding, Grace and Redemption, we played Amazing Grace. We played it at Bridget's funeral. And then we sang it over my dad on the day that he died in the hospital. And then we had it played at his service as well. It's like you can sing it in the good times, you can sing it in the valley. But my favorite line in Amazing Grace is when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining like the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. I just think it's a beautiful picture of, okay, after 10,000 years, there's another 10,000 years and then another 10,000 years.
That's my favorite line in that
Yeah.
song too. When we get to that, the beginning of that last stanza, it's like my whole soul breathes.
I agree with what you're feeling because it just is so hope-filled and reminds me of the amazing grace that we have.
Ashley, would you close us in prayer?
Yes, I would love to. Dear Lord, I just thank you so much for this opportunity to be here with Jennifer and to talk about our babies in heaven. We are so abundantly grateful that you have overcome death and you have overcome the brokenness of this world, that it was in your grace and mercy that you have given us a way out of this and you have given us a solution to death. You see us in our pain right now. You count our tears. You know our thoughts. You sit with us in our sadness. You're not afraid of our emotions. You see the anger. You see the desire for justice. You see the confusion of why these things are happening, Lord, and you welcome all of us and our emotions to the table because you'll sit with us in our humanity. I pray for each person who's grieving, who's walking this road and feels so alone and feels so hopeless, Lord, that you would make your presence so tangible to them, that you would show them your grace and your mercy and your love and your goodness. We love you, Lord. You will restore and redeem all things, and we thank you for that grace and redemption. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Ashley, this has been absolutely a gift. Thank you for giving us your time, but also for revealing your heart of hope for people who are in the midst of grief and loss.
Thank you for having me.
I want to go back to something Ashley said right at the beginning when she was talking about her and Matt's wedding and their theme of grace and redemption. She said they picked that theme because both of them came out of deeply wounded places before they got married. This side of eternity, you and I, we are going to live deeply wounded, whether it's a miscarriage or a stillbirth or a family member who's been taken from us, or we just struggle to forgive ourselves. Whatever it is, we are all living wounded. And that's why Jesus came. I want you to close your eyes for just a few moments and imagine Jesus, the God of the universe, holding you, holding your grief, holding your tears, your sorrow, all the things you wish you hadn't lost. There in the middle of your grief, He's looking at you tenderly and with such compassion. This is grace, God's movement toward you and to you for His glory and your good. As always, you can find me at jennifersakata.com, on Instagram at jennifersakata, on Facebook at jennifersakata.author, and on YouTube at Jennifer Sakata. Until next time, remember to live the grace life generously, friend. Grace for you, grace for them.